Hi, I'm Deane. I'm going to be at the studio for the month of September. We're going to have a little reception on the second Saturday. I'll do an evening Zoom class on photography and composition and touch on some of the things that I like to do with photos.
Fantastic. Well, just tell us about yourself and your current work.
I'm a retired family physician. I'm originally from Grand Forks, North Dakota. I first started shooting photos with my family's old Kodak. They actually had quite a good little Kodak that would take slides. And I've always been interested in nature and the stories that it has to tell. When we moved here, I've been really busy for many years, and then I started to have more time to spend in the woods. I took a volunteer master naturalist class at Itasca, started learning more about various flowers and trees and birds, and since then I've been captivated by those subjects.
Fantastic. So this says why art, but I guess we'll say why photography.
Why art?
Yeah.
Well, I think photography is art.
Right.
It can be representational, which most of my stuff is. I think art can tell people things that they didn't know. It can tell a story. It can show people aspects of the natural world that they didn't know anything about. When you take a picture of the Milky Way, you're forced to look at something that draws you deeply into time in a way that you maybe didn't expect.
Right. So when did you realize, well, maybe it was the first time you realized it was art for you?
When I started to realize this was when I started to go out and take pictures of landscapes.
Right.
And I would come home and I would have blue and then this sea of amorphous green and then maybe water, and I'd go, well, that's not interesting.
Right.
What's going on? And then I started to look for what's the focal point of a landscape, or what's the focal point of an object. And that's when I started to get interested in the art of it.
Right.
By realizing that that wasn't what I was doing.
So you kind of already mentioned this, but what inspires you, or what informs your work?
I'm inspired by learning new things.
Yeah.
And so if I learn something, then I want to convey that in my work. If I find a different duck, like a goldeneye that took up residence in our wood duck box,
Yeah.
then I want to go, oh, that's interesting. It's got this bright gold eye and it dives around. They're very active. And so I want to learn about that and end up photographing it.
Right.
Same is true of different flowers or other trees or other things like that.
So, do you have any influences? Is it nature?
Well, you can get your influence from nature, but photography is a specific medium. And so Elliot Porter was one of the first photographers whose book I really clung to and looked through to learn how he did things differently.
No.
There are other famous photographers, David Monk, who composes things. Richard Hamilton Smith, I think, has been a big influence, just seeing what he can do that's so artistic and how he can take an unusual perspective on something. He'll have a reed bending over the top and be shooting through these reeds at a scene in a way that you wouldn't expect.
Yeah. Looking for different angles.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, what is your creative process?
Well, I've learned that if you go out to try to shoot something specific,
Yeah.
and that's all you're focused on, you're going to miss a lot. So I might have an idea of what I want to go shoot, but I think for me, I try to be open to what are the possibilities.
Right.
You know, if it turns out to be a bad day and you can't shoot lady slippers that day, maybe it's raining or too cloudy or too bright and contrasty. You just kind of have to be open, and maybe something else will pop up and catch your eye.
Yeah, I always call it meditation or Zen. You sort of have to just sort of be in the moment, observing sort of light and what's happening, and
it really forces you to be in the present.
Yeah.
And I've learned that from naturalists too, that if you're out in the woods and you want to see things, you can't just go tromping along. You have to slow down and stop and quiet your mind down and just be in that very present moment.
So do you have an objective when you go out to shoot thing? Like you mentioned, I'm going to go out and do lady slippers, you know?
Well, it depends what I'm doing.
Yeah.
The last couple of days I've been out in LaSalle Scientific Natural Area with the specific goal of just shooting as many plants as I can find, because they were trying to identify what was growing there.
In that time of year, or is it?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, right now. So I was just out there shooting a flower, and then shooting the leaves, and then shooting the back of the flower, so I could identify it clearly.
Cool.
So it wasn't necessarily looking for artistic composition, although some of the things they came up with look pretty cool, so we'll see.
So I see you had 3 books. So you had the Little Minnesota,
Yeah,
and it was that. That's a combination with Jill, right?
yeah, Joe got it all started with Little Minnesota.
Little Minnesota, and
Yeah.
that was the first book you did.
That was the first book, that was
And
in
then-
2012.
And then you did
And I did Best of Itasca,
that's right.
which is a guide to Itasca State Park.
Okay.
Got 200 color photos in it,
Right.
so that was one of the fun parts.
So in that process, were you mainly going for an illustration, or or what did you do? Did you go from the photos then create the book, or how was that book created?
Well, it was a pile of everything.
Yeah.
I did everything all at once.
Yeah.
I was hiking the trails, so I was taking some photos of the trail just to show what the trail looked like.
Okay.
Maybe if it had bad footing, maybe we'd try to get a section where you could actually see that. Mostly I was photographing the lakes and the scenes around it, so people could see what was really cool about that trail.
Right.
Yeah. And then there's a whole bunch of photos of various trees and flowers and, things that people are looking for when they come to the park.
So we talked a little about the process,
Mhm.
and so that kind of explains it. So when you're in the studio, so you've taken all these photos. Let's say you've just done all these photos for Itasca. How did you end up deciding you wanted to do a book? What is the process there? Do you take the images? What do you do from there?
How I decided I wanted to do a book, we were in meeting with our editor after Little Minnesota, and she said, well, what do you want to do next? And I said, well, I had been spending a lot of time in Itasca. You want to do something up there? Oh, I love Itasca. So that's how that happened. Yeah.
Fantastic.
And then after that, we did Little Minnesota in World War II, where we were captivated by the stories of men that died in World War II from these little towns. So we did a whole book of that.
Oh, fantastic.
And for those photos, we were mostly working with old photos.
Right, sort of more looking into history.
Just fixing and restoring.
Right.
So when I get a photo, let's say I go take a photo of a bunch of lady slippers.
Right.
The first thing I do is I just open it up in Lightroom, which
Yeah.
is what I use mostly. And then I play around with the cropping and see, do I just want that one little lady slipper?
Right.
Or do I want to get the whole group? How do I want it centered? And then you always have to decide. Terry Young taught me this. She said you got to look at the edges of the picture and see what you don't want.
Right.
Is there something on the edge that a tree sticking there that's distracting?
Right.
Take
It's
out,
ruining the composition.
take out what
right.
you don't want.
Your eyes being drawn to it, you don't want it to be
Yeah.
drawn there.
Yeah. The other thing I look at is to try to keep it simple, because I get too complicated. I want to show every leaf and the whole setting and the trees above it, and so I have to be careful about that.
Right.
I took a workshop from Brian Hansel, who has more of a Zen approach to things, and he said always try to just keep things really simple and no more than 3 elements in each.
3 elements. Is that
In
why
each
you were saying
photo.
3? Okay.
Yeah, that's what he was saying.
Fantastic. So when do you know you're done with an image?
Well, yeah.
Or
I
you
don't.
know- You don't.
Because I'll print it, I'll use it for a while, I might run a card of it,
Yeah.
and then I'll look at it one day and I'll go, I'm gonna go back and do that again.
Well, I've been going back to a lot of images over COVID, and
Yeah.
realizing, why did I ignore this one? That are in kind of a junk folder.
Yeah. Yeah.
You realize maybe it was better than you thought, or you have fresh eyes on it. You forgot
Mhm.
about it, and it wasn't what you wanted immediately.
Or you print it, you got it the way you want it, and then when you print it, it looks too dark, or it's drab, or something isn't right, and then you have to go back and fix it.
All right.
But you don't always figure that out right away. So I'm always going back and looking at old stuff and redoing it. I just did that with a bunch of things.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Well, that's what we asked everyone. So one last
Okay.
question is: if you had a superpower, what would it be?
time travel.
Time travel.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense because you just
I
did a
go
world
to
war,
go to a different galaxy.
right?
See what it's like.